Should runners be tracking their macros? Well, yes, sometimes, under certain circumstances, for certain periods of time. And today we're going to talk about what those circumstances are, when it might be beneficial, and how you can get started to help get the benefits of macro tracking for performance, recovery from injury, and health without all the headache and heartache of actually tracking your macros. Now, before we get into that, just to set some context, for those of you who have been living under a rock, the macros are protein, carbs, and fat. They are the macronutrients, which just means big nutrients, which is different from micronutrients, which is like your vitamins and minerals and all that kind of stuff. And why might runners want to count their macros or track their macros? Well, broadly speaking, there's three reasons that come up a lot. So one is performance. If you want to improve your performance, then it would be helpful to track your macros to help ensure that you're getting the right nutrition on board to benefit from your training. Because what we often see, and this is something I've been guilty of myself, you're pushing to do a PR or do a race of a distance that you haven't got to before, and you're training, you're really pushing in and doing really well, but on the nutrition side of things, you are not supplying the body with the fuel and the building blocks that it needs to actually adapt to that training. So essentially, you're just leaving money on the table and not benefiting from all of your training. So if you're trying to improve your performance, then counting macros or tracking macros for a period of time is really helpful. Another reason might be if you're coming back from injuries. So this is one that we're going to be working on with runners all the time. Now, I would say that nutrition is not one of the primary levers that we want to pull if we're trying to recover from an injury in almost all cases, right? So most of the time, it's going to be your three critical components. That is muscle strength, strengthen the structures, and refine the biomechanics. They're the best ways to recover from and address injuries. That being said, nutrition is part of that adaptive process. And then the final reason, which is really common, is health, which you could kind of broadly draw into two categories, where you've got weight loss, which is where the number on the scale comes down. So we're losing body fat and the scale reads a lighter number. And then body recomposition, which is where you reduce the body fat percentage, but increase the muscle mass. And the number on the scale might stay the same. It might go up, it might go down, depending on exactly how you do it. But essentially, body recomposition is more muscle, less fat, and weight loss is just less fat. So they're the reasons that you might be interested in macro tracking. So we have performance, we have injury, and we have health, weight loss / body recomposition. Now we're going to talk a little bit about why do an 8-week macro tracking challenge if you're a runner in order to get those benefits. So not why, but how we're going to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to lean on Precision Nutrition's macro calculator. And I have a podcast episode with Brian St. Pierre of Precision Nutrition. I'm going to link to that in the description. He talks at length about all the details, why it is designed this way, and all of the nuances. Today, we're going to talk more about the practical implementation of how to use it rather than the theory of why to use it. Now, the reason I gravitated to Precision Nutrition's content on this is particularly because of the way they make macro tracking far, far, far easier and much more practical by leaning on portion sizes based on the size of your hand, which makes tracking really simple. So as opposed to putting numbers into an app and finding all your food and logging it that way so that you know what your macros were, you're just going to use the size of your hand to measure different foods, and that helps you track much more easily. So just to recap that stuff from Brian, the different portions are, so for protein, you would have one palm is one portion of protein. So if you think of like a chicken breast, that would be one portion of protein. And then for carbohydrates, they have a cupped handful, right? So if you cup your hand and then fill it with rice, that's going to be one portion of carbohydrates. Then for fats, they have a thumb. So if you think of like a piece of cheese about the size of my thumb or your thumb, obviously, that is going to that's going to be one portion of fats. And then finally, they have fistfuls of veggies. So if you think about some lettuce about the size of your fist, that's one portion of veggies. As you notice there, they've added a fourth category, right? So veggies are their own separate category. In the episode with Brian, he talks about why they've done that, but essentially it's just to make eating healthy more practical. So they add veggies because usually people are not eating enough colorful veggies and fresh veggies. So if you add that as a separate tracking thing, the calculator that they've designed will incorporate it into your overall values. So they're not going to be added on, they're going to be incorporated in. And then what we're going to do for our 8-week challenge, which you're going to do, is to track one of your macros for 2 weeks and then track another one of your macros for 2 weeks using the Palm as your sizing guide to track. And then I have a couple of resources that I'll link to in the description below to help you do this. So for the first 2 weeks of our 8-week challenge, we're just going to track our protein. So we're not going to track anything else. So all you're going to do is track your protein in terms of how many palms of protein per day do you eat. So if you wouldn't eat 4 chicken breasts in one day. That would be weird. But let's say you did. That would be 4 palms of protein. That's 4 portions of protein you had that day. That's what you're going to put on your tracking sheet, which is linked in the description. And then in the second 2 weeks, we're going to do carbs. So we're just going to track carbs. We're not going to track protein anymore. You're just going to document how many cupped handfuls of carbs you ate per day, every day for 2 weeks. In the third week, we're going to do veggies. So you're going to document on your little sheet, which is again linked in the description, how many fistfuls of veggies you ate per day for every day on those 2 weeks. And then in the final 2 weeks, you're going to do fats. So you're going to document how many thumbs of fats you ate per day every day during the final 2 weeks. And the reason I've designed the 8-week challenge like this is for a couple of different reasons, actually. So the first is that if we do one at a time, it makes it easier because it's surprisingly difficult. Like when you hear me describe this, it sounds easy, but actually when you get into practice, if you're trying to track more than one thing, even though you've got this nice, easy palm portion way of tracking, if you're trying to track that every day, every meal, like 3 meals a day plus snacks, like this is how people stop doing stuff. So rather than trying to track everything, what we're going to do is just focus on one at a time, 2 weeks at a time. And what that's going to mean by the end of the 8 weeks, we've got a really good idea what we're good at and we don't need to worry about, and what we suck at and what we need to pay more attention to. The other reason is that by focusing on one at a time, we can start to develop just a little bit over those 2 weeks, the habit of eating a bit more or a bit less, whatever our calculator has determined is best for us, of the different macros. So if you're chronically not eating enough protein, which you find out once you put your numbers in the calculator with your goals, and then you realize you're only having 2 palms of protein a day and you should be having 6, then for the first 2 weeks, you're going to be tracking how many you're eating. And you're going to naturally start to eat. You're like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be eating 6. I'm only having 2. And you're going to start to eat 3 or maybe 4. And then you're going to get in the habit of preparing foods that meet that habit. So you're going to start to develop the habit of eating more protein if you're not eating enough. Conversely, if you're in the second 2 weeks, you're tracking your carbs and you're supposed to have like 10 cupped handfuls of carbs and you're having 10 like every day. You're gonna be like, well, I already have all the habits I need for this. I don't need to worry about it too much. So it's going to help you dial in like what you're not doing well, but also just start to develop the habit so that when you finish your 8-week challenge, you're going to know 1 or 2 macros of where you need to concentrate going forward. And then you're going to start to more long-term develop the habits to get your the right amount of those macronutrients and not worry about the ones that you're already pretty good at. Okay, so in the next part of this video, this challenge, I'm going to go through on the Precision Nutrition website, which might change, right? I'm recording this in June 2024, so the future might look different. It might not be there. You can shoot me a message if it's not. But right now it's there. And what we're going to do is go through with my numbers as an example. So if you can toggle on the video, if your app allows you to do that, or click the link in the description to watch the YouTube video or come back to it later. I'll do my best to explain it in a way that if you're listening to this when you're driving or something, you understand the principles, and then you can go and get the resources later to actually do it yourself. Okay, so we have the Precision Nutrition website up here. As I say, it's linked in the description. And then I'm just going to go through and get myself some macros calculated. So the first thing it's asking me is my age, which is 40 now. I just turned 40, which was very disappointing a couple of weeks ago. And I'm 5'8". I weigh 173 pounds right now, which is a little overweight. And then it's asking me what my goal is. So as we just talked about, there's various different reasons that you might be doing this. If you choose lose weight, which it says here, it's going to ask you how much you want to weigh. So let's say I wanted to weigh 163 and I currently weigh 173. So I want to lose 10 pounds, let's say, right? It's going to say by when. And then I would suggest that you make your target of by when mean that you are only losing a maximum of 2 pounds per week. So if I want to lose 10 pounds, as I've described there, I would make my target 5 weeks away. So the most I'm going to lose is like 2 pounds a week. And the reason is that research shows that it's the most sustainable weight loss if you are losing about 2 pounds a week on average. Now, if we come back to the goal, there's other goals here, but I'm going to click on body recomposition. So increase muscle mass, reduce fat mass. Then it's going to ask me about my eating style. So this bit's a little bit tricky because as endurance athletes, as runners, we want to be hitting about 50% of our calories coming from carbohydrate. Now, you see here we've got paleo and ketogenic. Well, you can see this if you're watching it. I wouldn't recommend those for for endurance athletes, really, of any type. Now, I know that that's maybe somewhat controversial because these are quite popular. That being said, the people who do well on those diets, who are like endurance athletes or runners, typically are exceptions to the rule rather than the rule. So unless there's a really good reason to presume that you're different or that you've tried this a lot and you know that paleo or keto works very well for you and doesn't compromise your performance or make you more vulnerable to injury, then I would suggest you go with one of the others. So that's a diet with no restrictions. We've got Mediterranean, vegetarian, or fully plant-based, which will be vegan, right? So they're the different options. And I would suggest you stay away from paleo or keto. Now, let's say that I'm going to go for fully plant-based because I'm vegan. And then it's going to give me my macronutrient ratios. And this is where we are going to do a little bit of customization as well, right? So we want to get about 50% of our macros from carbs. And you can see for me, it's already spit that out. It's saying 50% from carbs, 30% from protein, and 20% from fat. That's what it's going to give me as my prescription. But if it didn't, then I would want to change it a little bit. So let's choose anything. So this is a diet with no restrictions. And you'll see it's the standard recommendation is 35% carbs, 30% protein, and 35% fat. But as a runner, as an endurance athlete, we want to change this. So we're going to hit customize, and then you can choose one of the recommendations if it already has 50% carbs as a suggestion, or you can click the little enter my own button, make the carbs, drag it up to 50% so that whatever numbers it gives you for your macro targets, we always want to have a baseline of 50% from carbohydrate. Then it's just going to ask me how many meals I eat a day. I'm going to click 3. How active am I? So it wants to know how much I'm doing just generally as work and moving around during the day. And I have a desk job, unfortunately, now. And then it asks me what my weekly workouts are like. Now, so if you're currently working with us and doing this, you're going to go into Final Surge and see how many hours per week you're training for. So for me, I looked at my Final Surge yesterday. I'm doing usually between 4 and 6 hours of training a week. So I'm going to click that one. But if you're doing 3 or 4 hours, you would click that one. If you're only doing 1 or 2 hours, you click that one. Then it's going to adjust your prescription accordingly. And then it gives you your results. So it'll give you a little pop-up that shows you what you need. And you're going to click the little access your complete guide button so that it's going to download your PDF so you can have a look at it. Okay, so on my PDF, as I scroll through it, it's going to give me, the first thing it's going to show me is my recommendations. So it's saying per day, I should be having 5 palm-sized portions of protein, 6 to 8 fists of veggies, 11 cupped handfuls of carbs, and 3 thumbs of healthy fats. Now, the rest of the document has a lot of useful resources in it, so meal ideas, as well as a little bit more detail on how to categorize different foods. So you might be like, well, what's chocolate or what is muffins, right? Like I got home from a long run today and my wife had made muffins and I know that I'm supposed to hit 3 thumbs of fats. And I'm like, well, is a muffin a fat or a carb? So if you go into the document a little bit further down, it'll show you like what different things are. So muffins, for example, it'll classify as carbohydrates, but it's high in fats. So you can kind of use your judgment. I'm going to count it as fats for me. So I'm going to count that as one of my thumbs for today. But then I also had a bowl of pasta to recover from my long run. And that was 2 cupped handfuls of pasta. So that would count as 2 of my portions of carbs for the day. And then they have a tracking sheet in there that you can use, which is great because you can print it off and you can just go through one bit at a time. For the 8-week challenge, I've made a separate little tracking sheet that you can use that's just going to do one at a time to make it a little more simple. So you can see that here if you're watching the video. And what we're going to do is set our target for the first 2 weeks of hitting our protein, the second 2 weeks of the carbs, the third 2 weeks, we're going to hit the veggies, and the fourth 2 weeks, we're going to hit the fat. So we're going to write our target in the top row. So for protein, I've got an example here as well, which you can see when you see the video. Now, the idea with this 8-week challenge is to get some idea of what's going on with you so that you know where you're starting from. So when I tracked my macros by using the portion method, just in the way I've described here, what I found is that I was always underdosing on the protein. So I was typically having maybe 3 or 4 pounds a day, whereas the prescription was 6. So I knew I wasn't getting enough protein. The carbs, I was usually pretty much on point. So depending on when I filled it in and what goals I set, it was usually around 11 cupped handfuls of carbs, and I usually eat that just fine. Same with the veggies. It was about 8 fistfuls of veggies, which I usually hit most days. Some days not, most days I do. But then the fats, I was way over. So I was having like 7 or 8 portions of fats, which would be a thumb. So 7 or 8 thumbs of fats, but I was only supposed to be having 2 or 3. So what that did is help me dial in, okay, well, I don't have to worry so much about veggies and carbs because I seem to take care of those naturally, but I need to eat more protein and I need to eat less fat. So now I start to pay more attention to that. So what you can do once you've got that context of, oh, I'm good at carbs, but I'm bad at fat. So I'm good at protein, but I'm not very good at veggies. You know what your problem macros are. You can then, after the 8-week challenge, just work on the 1 or 2 that you have difficulty with. And then you're going to try and continue to hit your targets for those. And you may do that by tracking them indefinitely. You might decide that that's just something you want to do. Or it might be something you do for another, let's say, 8 weeks, 4 per macro. And then you decide, okay, I've got a good idea now. I seem to be able to hit my 6 pounds of protein or whatever it is. And now I'm just going to stop tracking because I know well enough what I'm doing. And then you may return to tracking at some point in the future if you feel like you've drifted away from your recommended macro amounts. So click the link in the description, and then you're going to check out the various resources. Follow the steps to download your own precision nutrition macro calculator guidelines so you know what your targets are. Then once you have your targets, you're going to download the little tracking sheet, which is just an image that you're going to print out so you can track it for the next 8 weeks. And then you're going to find out, what are you good at macros wise? What do you suck at? What do you need to keep working on? And this will help you dial in your macros, which will help you dial in your nutrition for whatever your goal is, whether that is a performance goal, injury recovery goal, or a other health goal like weight loss or body recomposition. Now, as I mentioned, the nutrition side of things is an important part of recovery from injury, but it's definitely not one of the main parts. So the main parts, the big levers to move, are your strength, resilience, and biomechanics. So if you are having trouble with an injury, I would not recommend this 8-week challenge as a primary method to get rid of that injury and recover. So if you want help with that specifically, learn more about the 3 critical components in other episodes of the podcast. Or if you want to work with us to resolve it, just click the link in the description to book a free call and we'll have a chat, see if we might be able to help you.